Right, so it did occur to me that we haven't actually covered any texture painting so far. Just having a look back over some of your work, it's clear that you've had a really good stab at adding photographic textures since we did that exercise with the brick and the Blender challenge that was related to that. I just thought it might be an idea to look at, just applying really simple, very, very, very straightforward textures to characters like this. Or in this sort of style, in this sort of way. I do think it might suit some of your work a little more than adding photographs on your characters. Do remember that it is a requirement of the 3D modeling unit that you do try some texture painting. So this is the sort of style we're sort of aiming for. This is the sort of thing I'd like us to aim for. And this is what we're going to end up with, hopefully at the end of this session, although you probably won't animate it or render it. It's just going through the texture process. I thought using a tree just with a couple of different components, so two different materials, two different objects, might make sense. This one here I did take a little bit too far. But that was quite good fun. That was for another day. But this is the kind of texture painting or texture painted style I think would be more suitable to some of your characters than crowbarring photographic textures on there. So anyway, first of all, let's model a very, very simple tree. So the reason we're using a tree, like I said, is because it's got these two separate parts. So we can just try using two separate materials, two separate textures. Oh, brilliant. Thanks for that. Cursor to selected. Let's chuck a cube on the top. Now we're just going to use a quick modifier, subsurf modifier. Edit mode, chuck on a loop cut. And that reminds me, let's turn the screencast keys on. They are on, but for some reason you have to switch them off and on again. Right, so we've got two different parts. We're going to smooth them out a bit, smooth shading. And then let's split our screen and start looking at some texture painting. Go on. Come on. Don't make me look. I like an idiot. Right, so we have the 3D view over here, and we're going to have our UV editor. Yeah, UV editor on this side. So let's start off with the trunk. Select the trunk in edit mode. And you see we've got some UVs that they're perfectly fine. They're a bit too close to each other for my liking. So I'm going to just smart UV project, and I'm going to raise the island margin from 0 to 0.2. And that way there'll be a bit of space around these. These are known as islands, these pieces of UV information. So increasing the island margin will give us some gaps around them. That'll be quite helpful when it comes to painting on this, and then we'll not have to worry about paint overlapping from one UV onto the other. All right, so we've got our UVs. We've got an island margin. We're going to create a new image texture. I'm going to call it trunk. I'm going to increase the width to 2040 and 2048. And we're going to give it a base color. It doesn't really matter. We're probably going to change this anyway, but we'll give the image a base color which matches, which would be brown. In object mode, we can't see anything, but when we switch to texture mode, we'll see that. First of all, let's just set our material on here. We don't have a material on the trunk so far. So we'll add a material, and then on the base color here, we'll click the little circle, and instead of a base color, we'll choose an image texture, and we'll choose our trunk texture from the drop-down. Okay, we still can't see anything. If we go to rendered view, we'll see that brown. And if we go to texture paint mode, we'll see the brown. What I don't like is the lighting. So I'm going to stay in solid shading, but we're going to switch from studio lighting to flat. And that'll let us just concentrate on the colors that we're applying here. All right, so we've now moved into texture paint mode. So we've got some brushes down the left-hand side, and our tool settings will be down the right. So first of all, just very briefly, we've got a regular textured draw brush, which is just like a regular paintbrush in Photoshop. And then with that brush selected, we have various settings available to us. So we can pick a color and we can affect its strength and blend mode and so on. We've got a soften brush, we've got a smear brush. We might use a couple of these today. We've got a clone brush, which we won't use today. We've got a fill brush. So if we select the fill, for example, you can see that automatically it doesn't have a radius, but it's got a strength of 100% or 1. So if we pick another color and we just click on that with the fill brush, we get 100% of that color. It's filling the whole object there with that color. We're not going to use any masking today, but let's go back to the text draw brush. In fact, before we do that, let's just fill it with a brown again. Okay, and let's go back to some of these brush settings. So we have blend modes. If you may be aware of these, if you've used Photoshop before, I only ever really use multiply and screen just for darkening and lighting areas. We've got our brush radius. So this is how big or small it is. You can use the square brackets for that as well. Square brackets will make your brush bigger or smaller. And the strength. So at 0, it is completely transparent. At 1, it is 100% opaque. You've got this white color here. Shift and F. Shift and F? Yeah, Shift and F. Just a bit laggy. And you can change the strength on the fly like this, which is quite a nice feature. So down to 0.4, Shift and F, back to 1. Okay, that's quite handy. So here's our color picker, and then associated with our color picker is a color palette. And I'm actually going to take a minute to set up a new color palette. And we're going to just choose 3 tones of brown. I am a big advocate of using 3 tones when dealing with color, just to keep things simple. So I'm going to select a mid-tone. I'm going to click plus to add that to the palette. I'm going to select a light tone, and I'm going to click plus, and I'm going to click a dark tone of brown, and I might just make that dark a bit warmer, taking it towards the reds, and click plus, and you can see now my palette has 3 little swatches, a mid-tone, a light tone, and a dark tone, and we can just select them obviously by clicking on them. And then that's the color picker, that's the color palette. We've got some advanced settings, we're not going to look at them. We can apply textures to our brushes, so if you want to paint on a chainmail texture, oh, that's just lovely. Thanks for that. You can paint on textures. Quite hard, but it can be done. Texture masking, that relates to painting on with textures. We've got a whole load of stroke settings which you can play around with, so you can change your stroke to dots and dashes and lines and curves. We will try the stabilize stroke setting in a bit. That will let us draw with a mouse much easier. The fall off is how sensitive your brush is, or actually it's how hard the brush edge is. So this little, you've got some fall off options, but I only ever use this one or this one. So this one is your hard edge brush, and then this one is soft edge brush. Just look at the transition here. Soft and hard edge brushes with the fall off. No, we're not going to do any masking. We might do some symmetry. So I could have painted on my eyes there using X symmetry. Yeah, so we might do a bit of that later on. Turn that off just now. And then options. We will change the bleed actually. So if you zoom in on your UVs, can you see? Probably not. The overlap between this brown and the UV. Let me fill with a different color here. So come back to the color picker, fill brush, let's fill it. No, green, thank you. Okay, so you can see that there's a tiny overlap. Occasionally this will not overlap the UV enough, and you'll get little glitches on the surface. So I'm going to turn the bleed up to 10, and you will see when I paint on, you can see that bleed. That's the overlap of paint over the edges of the UVs. Mid-tone, mid-tone. Okay, and then these options are handy: occlude and backface culling. I'll just show you them now. Why not? So while these are switched on, it's not going to paint on faces we can't see. So if I take the light brush and we paint on this surface here, you can see that it's only painting on the surface that's facing the camera here. If we switch these off, and I've never really experimented with one on, one off. I normally just have them either all off, all on, or all off. So if I go into the side view here and paint on, you should see that same color on the other side. It worked. Okay, so off or on, however you'd like to work. So very, very handy in some circumstances if you want to paint right across the whole object. So if you've got feet, for example, 2 feet, you can just paint across the bottom of the shoe, and it will paint right through to the back. Although it does seem to have missed these faces, which is slightly annoying. But there you go. I have everything. And yeah, that's about it for now. That's about it for those settings. We might come back to some of these as we progress. I don't want to take too long over things. So say we wanted to paint on a bit of grass at the bottom here, or a sort of maybe a mossy base to this tree. We could make sure we have the occlude setting and the backface culling switched off. Choose a nice big brush, 100% strength, and paint it on. And oh, but this is really not helpful. Related to that, actually, is this setting up here. Face selection masking for painting. So I'm going to quickly jump to edit mode and add in a loop cut. And we can grab a set of faces with this active, with Alt left clicking. So we can select these faces. Shift Alt will let us add to our selection. I think you can use circle select as well. Let's try circle select. Yeah. Okay, so now it will only let me paint on the selected faces. So let's choose that green again. So that's quite nice. Okay, so face selection masking. Face selection masking for painting. We'll switch that back off for now. I actually liked that it gave us this blurry look. So now I get a darker green for this moss here at the base. It's far too high up the tree, but what are you going to do? And then let's have a look at some of these stroke settings again. Okay. A regular brush, a small regular brush, and what I wanted to point out was this stabilize curve option. So let's choose a light brown, and let's come down and click on stabilize brush in the stroke settings. So without this setting, and I try and draw a curve with a mouse, you can see it is clearly not a stable, smooth stroke. But this option here vastly improves your ability to draw curves with the mouse switched on. So I'm clicking and dragging. You can see it's applying the paint on at that sort of tail that's following the brush around. It's given me some slightly strange results here, but I'm actually, oh dear, I'm not actually too worried about that for the time being, because I'm going to smooth and smear this stuff together. So let's just paint on some random lines here. We could actually do some of this in the 2D view. If we were to switch from the UV editor to the image editor, we can then switch from view mode to paint mode, and we have exactly the same settings over on this side. We need a bigger brush though. So that's quite nice too. Let's just add in some dark stuff. That's maybe a little bit too dark. Just going to make sure my pivot point is anchored on here. I'm going to go to orthographic view. Okay, so I went ahead and did a bit more smearing and a bit more blurring and sorted out some of my drive space issues, I think. But yes, a point I'd like to make is that the smearing and softening is much easier working on the actual image itself than it is in the 3D view, or it certainly is on my computer. So possibly will be the same situation on your computers at home as well. But you can see that just randomly smearing this stuff together does a fairly good job of blending the light, the dark, and the midtones into something resembling a tree. If you can imagine with the correct lighting, that would actually be reasonably convincing. So what I'm going to do just very briefly is I'm going to get my green moss back, which I've somehow lost. So I'm going to paint on a couple of washes. So what I mean is by sort of layering it on with layers of transparent paint. So I'm going to get my green back. And you'll notice I'm choosing most of my colors from the center of the color wheel. So the center of the color wheel, you're going to have desaturated colors with gray right in the middle to these zinging, highly saturated colors towards the edge. So I'm just getting a green sort of from the mid range there. Now let's see how we get on. I'm going to make sure that I have occlude and backface culling switched off. I'm just going to paint on. So you can see with the transparent brush, I can paint on a sort of wash of color over the top of the bark. I'll just do it from the side as well. And that'll do for now. It's not looking brilliant. I'm going to actually paint on a shadow as well. So I'm going to pick this color and maybe just get a sort of desaturated bluey purple color. It's going to be pretty dark anyway, but it's going to be weak, so very low strength, and I'll just paint that on around about here, and then just sort of faking a little bit of lighting. I think that will improve things slightly once we get the top of the foliage on. A little bit more on the top there. And right, so one other thing I need to point out is that you must save this image. Okay, this image that we've been working on, this 2D image, needs to be saved outside of Blender. So image, save as, and I don't really want to use the desktop. I'm going to go to file stream. Let's try and use. Okay, so I had a crash trying to save that image. So if I went away, I've had my tea, and I've come back a little bit happier. I've recreated this chunk again for I think the third time tonight. So let that be a lesson to you. Learn from my mistake. Make sure you save your work. Save your texture out as a separate PNG file. You must do that. So at the beginning of the process, save as. So let me see if I can remember to do it this time. We're going to go through the same process again with the foliage, but I wanted to show you one more technique with the fill tool. So first of all, we'll create a new texture for a foliage. And we'll set 2048 again. We'll leave the color black for the time being. We'll just switch to object mode and make sure we've got our materials set up. So into the material tab, new material, and then for the base color, set that to image texture. Make sure we've chosen that foliage image as the image to use. And then when we switch to texture paint, we'll see that black texture applied to our object. So fill tool, the fill tool will give you this gradient option in the color picker. So we can switch to the gradient, and we're going to change the dark swatch here, just selecting the dark swatch, change that to a dark green. Okay, something like that. And we'll change the light swatch here, if I can select it, to a mid-tone green. Something like that. And then I think if we drag from the bottom up, there we go, we've got a nice shadow on the bottom. So we're using texture painting to sort of fudge in some lighting information, to fake some lighting. So I'm going to go back to my regular texture draw brush, choose a slightly lighter color again, not quite as saturated as that. Nice big brush with the square brackets, and that'll do. It's a little bit too bright. Okay, something like that. That's not really made much difference, but so we'll leave it there. And this is exactly the sort of approach I'd like you to take for some of you out there. I think your characters really will suit this approach. So rather than trying to fudge together a sort of janky looking photographic texture, I think just some subtle texture painting, just to create even just some simple lighting information along the bottom of your character, the lower half of your character. You can add some shadows, some highlights around the top. You don't necessarily need to get into detailed face textures, that kind of thing. This will do the job nicely. And I have forgotten to save my image again. So image menu. You can see the little star there indicates that there is something in the image menu that's not saved. So we'll save as, and I'm not going to risk putting it on the file stream this time. We'll save that image out as a PNG. And we've got these two textures and two materials, a texture for each material, saved under here. And then if we save the file, and we should really, when we're using external data, pack into blend as well, and save again, and that'll do for now. So I would like you to go through the process with the tree. I think it would be a nice exercise to use the soften and the smear tools. I've actually got my specular highlight at the default setting there on the foliage. So turn that down and we get rid of that nasty plastic shine on things. Okay, so I hope you get on okay with that.